few slides to go over. I will say that I'm a little under the weather, so if you hear me sneezing and coughing, it's not COVID, I'll tell you that much. Anyways, without further ado, 2022 Specialty Crop Block Grant Program. Thank you everyone for coming on. What are specialty crops? Specialty crops are defined by the USDA as fruits, vegetables, tree nuts, dried fruits, horticulture, and nursery crops, which include floriculture. It must be for human consumption or aesthetics. For a comprehensive list, please visit the website listed there. There's a lot of different specialty crops. I'll get questions often about, is this a specialty crop? And I have to look myself. I do not know all of them, but we're getting there. The purpose of the Specialty Crop Block Grant, though, is to enhance the competitiveness of Wisconsin's specialty crop industry. Funding priorities are environmental sustainability, pest and disease control, and varietal improvements. Development of food safety practices, which assist with the compliance of the Food Safety Modernization Act, good agricultural practices and good handling practices certification. Increasing the demand for and supply of Wisconsin specialty crops, industry innovation and production, processing, and packaging. Education for producers, processors, and the general public to increase production, sales, or consumption of Wisconsin specialty. Minimum award is $10,000, maximum is $100,000. Average award is about $45,000. We rarely award $100,000, but it has happened. Eligibility-wise, project needs to enhance the competitiveness of specialty crops, right? So your project cannot include or benefit non-specialty crops. There are no exceptions to that. Project cannot benefit a single organization, institution, or individual. This is probably the number one no we see. So you need to make sure that your project must benefit more than one commercial product, organization, or individual. Proprietary projects aren't allowed, and results must be shared. Your project must pertain to issues which affect specialty crop industry, not issues which only affect your personal business. Entities which are allowed to apply, nonprofit, for-profits, universities, local, state, and federal governments, individuals. In terms of a grant time frame, proposals are due to Wisconsin DATCP on the 24th of this month. That's 2 weeks. We will review the grant proposals immediately, make more determinations and any revisions, and let people know by mid-April we need to submit our proposal to the USDA by May 3rd. We normally take the summer and review and approve everything. We generally hear back from them September, October. We make full announcements and projects begin in November. Projects will end June 30th, 2025. So project dates must start no earlier than November 1st of this year and end on or before June 30th, 2025. If you want a 9-month project or a 22-month project, you pick the end date, so it can be as long as you want. However, realistic start date is mid-November or December this year. You can delay the start of your project, but don't delay it for too long. Otherwise, reviewers are going to suggest you just apply again next year, since you don't necessarily need the funds this year. Before I get into crafting a strong project concept, are there any questions on what we just went over?
No questions have come up in the chat yet.
Okay. A moment. Okay. Well, let's get into how to craft a strong. Increasing your chances of selection. Project shows the potential to provide solutions which lead to measurable benefits to specialty crop growers and consumers. All right, so measurable impacts. Will the result be used by a lot of people or growers or entities? Will they be used immediately? Does the project have a large impact, right? The impact can mean the number of growers affected, the region of the state affected, or is the bang for your buck great? Okay, well, you might only impact a small number of people or a small region of the state. Is the impact on those people or that region significant? Well-established industries are more likely to be funded than new and or small industries. But if you are a small industry, don't be discouraged. All right, new and different is also a plus. but you just really need to spell out the measurable benefits and significant impact. Which, for example, the most funding went to hops in 2015, not potatoes or cranberries, but hops weren't funded at all in 2011. Something to keep in mind. In terms of increasing a chance of selection, projects which are supported by and address the need of U.S. specialty crop growers, private and public partnerships, where individuals participate as grower cooperators, or different projects which have not been previously funded by this grant, and the project demonstrates likelihood of success. What is important to note here, the project need, all right, the impact of your project, how can you enhance or amplify it? Keep in mind here, competition for this grant is high. Reviewers will fund projects that seem urgent, important, or show direct benefit. They're less likely to fund something that seems like a nice idea. Right? If it can be put off or until later, it's probably not going to get funded. Think about ways to increase the impact of your project. Can you bring on other partners? Think about indirect impacts, project priorities or activities without watering down the project. All right, the likelihood of the project is going to be achieved. Will others believe you have the ability to carry out the desired result? Has this been done before? You can always beef up your project with partners, letters of support, or descriptions of how you're going to make things happen. You don't want the reader to question in the end whether your project can succeed. Ideas to avoid small-scale pilot projects. All right, pilot projects from a standpoint that you're doing something on a small scale that you'll share for others to replicate. Okay, they tend to come across as being an excuse to get funding for something you want here, rather than truly being a project others genuinely that you're willing to provide. So how do you, what's the solution to that? Large-scale pilot project, statewide pilot project, or regional pilot, or truly justifies the need for this elsewhere and directly explains many ways you'll reach the audience who's desperate to have those results. Feasibility studies, also something to avoid. Okay, while they can get funded, you need to make a large scale and be very aggressive in the idea that you want to move the plan forward, or just checking out an idea. These tend to fail because they go into the, well, it'd be nice to fund this one category instead of we need to have this one category. Website, social media campaigns, they're kind of unpopular because everyone has this now. So your business or organization should be putting their own funding into this. Way to combat that is to make the goal or objective something you can achieve by including web updates or social media campaigns in the budget to make sure it's a tool to achieve your goal and not your end-all be-all goal. Right? Lastly, projects with too much budget, which benefits a single entity or a private entity. Next up is writing your proposal, but I'll pause here to see if there are any questions on the previous slides. I'm hearing nothing, so we'll get moving here. The application format. All right, online applications can be found on our website. You'll see the direct link there, or you can go to the DATCP homepage and search specialty crop block grants. They must be submitted by 5 o'clock on Thursday the 24th. The application should not exceed 10 pages. This does not include support letters. Applicants have to use the form that we have on the website. That comes straight from the USDA, and we cannot change that at all. All right. Submit it in Microsoft Word, please, not a PDF. Don't wait until 4:55 on the 24th of March to submit it and find out it didn't go through. Also confirm I received it. You should just ask for confirmation in the email. I will always send one. If I don't, though, I might miss it. So just make sure it's been confirmed that it's been around. Gotten it. In terms of the application cover page, we don't have the actual cover page on the application this year, so you need to include this information in your own format, but you need to include the name, address, the business phone, and the DUNS number of the applicant, contract signer's name and title, project coordinator's name, title, and email, the industry sector of the specialty crop which is targeted, total grant amount which is requested. I need to identify what funding priority or priorities are addressed with the grant, and the project activities which are going to take place. In terms of the project description, okay, one sentence. describe your project. Who's going to accomplish it, what and how, right? It's also used to create press releases, which announce recipients, and by the USDA, post recipients on their website. Okay, once more, be brief and concise. List the outcome and one main way you're going to achieve it, but several activities you need to achieve. It is a great way to capture the essence of your project and entice the reviewer to keep reading it or not keep reading it. However, there's no score associated with this, but it's an important part of the application itself. You can go to the USDA AMS specialty crop website and look at the approved project list where you can read hundreds of project description statements. I have an example right there. The ABC University will mitigate the spread of citrus greening by developing scientifically based practical measures to implement in a quarantine area and disseminating results to stakeholders, grower meetings and field days. Okay, so you got the who, the what, and the how it's going to be done. In terms of project purpose, include a summary which addresses the specific issue, problem, need, the goals of the project, and why the project's important. All right, so a little bit of information here, but you clearly want to state the purpose of the project. Purpose should include a specific issue, problem, interest, or the need to be addressed. What is the problem? All right, what evidence shows the problem exists and needs to be addressed? In terms of goals, what specifically are you going to accomplish? Well, why is this so important? Because it draws the reviewer in with specific concepts, but not necessarily quantified or qualified data. It's going to be in the impact section. Purpose here is where you're going to tell your compelling story. Okay, it's where you establish the need for funding. Impactful. Don't waste the section with unimportant details where you want the reviewer to want to keep reading and want them to say, wow, you really need to give these guys some money. All right, but don't give too much detail on setting up a study or creating your infrastructure. Goals are important and you need to achieve them, okay, but only explain steps that prove you can achieve your goals, not necessarily too much detail of the project setup or data collection and whatnot. Reviewers wise, the projects tend to fall into one of two categories based on the information in the project purpose and impact sections. It's either we need to fund this project or it would be nice to fund this project, right? But again, this grant is very competitive, so projects that would be nice to fund tend to take a back seat to projects that demonstrate a real urgency or need. Just keep this in mind when thinking about your project. If you don't feel you can demonstrate a real need to have the project funded now, it's probably not going to get funded. Many times the project need changes based on where the organization is at time of application. You may have the same project idea for 2 years, but in the first year, it may not be a priority and therefore hard to justify. Whereas in the next year, it might naturally come to the forefront as an organizational need and be much easier to explain as being necessary. If you have to artificially inflate your project need, reviewers are going to pick up on that. So try to flesh out what organization or project needs are most and see if it aligns with specialty crop priority. It's also a good place to emphasize how your project addresses the funding priority, even though it might not be mentioned in the RFP. What you want to avoid, in-depth details on how you're going to accomplish the project and very specific step-by-step procedures for achieving the goals and objectives. Sorry. In terms of beneficiaries and potential impact, who are the beneficiaries of the project? How many beneficiaries will be impacted? You can estimate or give a range there. We don't necessarily specific number, but a range is fine. This section combined with section 7 external project support makes up the impact scoring criteria, which is worth 20 points. So we want to describe how this project potentially impacts Wisconsin's specialty crop industry and or the public. Make sure you are addressing the following. Who are the beneficiaries? Include the direct and indirect beneficiaries and how many beneficiaries are impacted. You need to quantify the impact. The amount of people, again, a range is fine. The amount of money involved. If you don't have the ability to make realistic estimates and explain how you got them, don't use them. How will the beneficiaries be impacted? Does the number benefiting justify the investment? Things just to keep in mind. Building on a previously funded specialty crop, right? This only applies to previous specialty crop block grants. So if your project has funding other than specialty crop, you don't need to state it here. That's going to be later on. You need to identify how it complements previous work funded by specialty crop grants. Describe how this project will build upon and differ from the previous project. Summarize the outcomes or the potential outcomes of previous efforts, just a few sentences, and provide lessons learned on potential project events. Right, so you want to show off that you are, again, if this applies to you, you want to show off that you are already considered worthy of funding. If you don't, it might just make it look like you're applying for the same funding for the same project. You're probably not going to get funded. Obviously, funding isn't guaranteed, but continuing a previously successful project could give you an advantage because you've already proved your capabilities to carry out a project and funds were already committed to that project. So additional efforts give you more value to past funding. Just be sure to be specific about how this adds to the previous work. If it repeats previous work, you need to emphasize the need to repeat it. Right? One thing to note, grants are not meant to perpetually fund operating expenses. They are meant to fund trials or uncertainties, so private entities or individuals don't have to bear the financial burden of discovering things that will benefit the public. Sections also meant to show you're not asking for continual funding, the same thing. If you're not receiving funding building off a previous grant, it wouldn't hurt to include this beneficiary section. Moving on. Still building on a previously funded specialty crop, include lessons which were learned from implementing this project, including potential improvements, include how the lessons learned improvements incorporated to make the ongoing projects more effective and successful at meeting goals or outcomes, and describe the likelihood of the project becoming self-sustaining and not depending on grant funding. Definitely, right? Sustainability is a big part as far as reviewing grants and interview committees' eyes. Other project funding, we're not going to duplicate. We're not going to fund duplicate projects. Okay, if you submitted this project to a funding source other than specialty proper funding, and or the project is currently funded through another source, you need to identify that funding and describe how your project differs from or supplements the other funding project, or how you'll modify this project to return funds for efforts. So it just means here that you need to disclose what other grants you're applying to. If you receive specialty crop block grant funding you apply for, we'll ask you to report on whether you also received additional funding for the same project. As long as you don't receive more funding than the total cost of your entire project, you can just modify your specialty crop or the other application to fund different parts of the budget for your project. Again, this doesn't impact your score at all. Moving on, external project support. This is part of the project impact and scoring criteria. Describe specialty crop stakeholders who support this project and why. It addresses the impact the project has on these industries and include letters of support from the appropriate. So a couple things to mention here, or remind the reviewers who the main beneficiaries are, right? In terms of partners, if you've not already elaborated on how partners will help you, do so briefly here. If you have, you can always just list a quick reminder. Describe the positive impact the project will have on the targeted specialty crop industry. How will it be effective at enhancing the competitiveness of that industry? Is it apparent the project is important to and supported by the impacted specialty crop industry? Will the industry be actively involved in the project? Okay, this ties back to the fundability part, stakeholders. In terms of letter of support, that's kind of a big part, but how many and from whom, that's something to keep in mind. Offer some bullet point topics. General letters of support like, we like this project, aren't very useful. Get people to be specific about how they're willing to participate in the project or be explicit about how it'll help them. If you have a major project partner who is not a co-applicant, they should submit a letter of recommendation outlining their activities they'll participate in. Fewer letters of support clearly showing partner commitment or project impact are more effective than lots of letters saying, we think this is a good idea. Just some suggestions. Don't wait till the final weeks to ask an industry entity to write you a letter. Involve them from the beginning. All right. If it's too late to involve them in the planning stages, at least be able to explain how it benefits them and ask how you can involve them if they'd like to be involved in the outcome. They can often be a resource for helping to measure your indicators by disseminating surveys or providing direct access to scores or results. Measurable outcomes. This is the area that changed a little bit. So before we get into that, do we have any questions that we need to address, Andrew?
Most of them I've been able to answer. We had one person ask a question about the competitiveness of the grant and how that's calculated. I was wondering if you knew, and maybe we need to get back with this information if you haven't already mentioned it. How many grants are typically, submitted on average or historically, and how many are funded? Thinking about the total dollar amount of money that we have to award.
Sure. We have a little bit more money this year than we have in the last couple of years, and that is this is a federally funded grant, so that comes from the USDA. In terms of amount of applications, I believe we had around 20 last year, and I believe we funded around 15. Specific numbers we can get back to you with, but that's something to keep in mind. We also had some COVID-related specialty crop funds come through, so that may have an impact on how many applications we received this year. But it's a good question. But in my experience, we have been able to fund a majority of the applicants that have applied for the specialty crop program. A couple times, we'll certainly have a few from year to year where we might fund an application at a lesser amount than what is requested. So you might be requesting 90,000. But if your application didn't score as high as some of the others, you might come back and ask if you're willing to work with less money. So that's something to keep in mind as you are crafting your application, or just as far as expectations go, and as far as having your application funded.
Yeah, and then we had another question, which I was able to answer, but maybe you can respond to it as well.
Sure.
The person had said they've been awarded a specialty crop block grant in the past. How does that impact future consideration for future projects? And do you have any advice on how to handle that?
Well, I guess my first question would be if they're applying again, does it continue on that? Does it continue on the previously awarded project? If so, they obviously. If it doesn't, then I would hope that their past project was successful, and reports were submitted in a timely fashion, and funds were used up. And well, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to get funded. The project's going to get funded. It definitely helps the review committee's eyes if they can check off those boxes.
Thank you.
Sure. Any more? You want to keep moving?
Sounds good.
Okay. Measurable outcomes. This area is worth 20 points. Your scoring criteria: is the outcome realistic and achievable? Do you have the ability to measure the outcome? Does the project directly benefit producers or processors of Wisconsin specialty crops? Will the project benefit them within the next 5 years? Is there a plan for monitoring performance toward meeting each outcome? Right? You don't want to pick too many outcomes or too many of the indicators or sub-indicators. Describe how you're going to measure the achievement of the indicators. Really, the success of your project is more about the ability to measure your indicators than whether or not you achieve the outcome. Okay, so don't choose things you can't measure. Take time to explain your monitoring or your performance assessment plan in this section. Getting into the measurable outcomes, there are 7 different outcomes. They are new this year. In terms of the indicators for the next few slides, I condensed them down. So if you see 5 indicators, choose from about 1 bullet point. That means I really kind of squish things about. All right. Outcome 1, though, is increasing the consumption and consumer purchasing of specialty crops. If you are engaged in marketing and promotion, you have to choose this one. Initially, that wasn't in the RFP, but we've gotten word from USDA if it is marketing promotion, they need to choose this one. There's 5 indicators to choose from. These are quantifiable indicators. So knowledge gain, number of people consuming the specialty crops, number of additional customers, number of additional business transactions, and increased sales. All right. It's easier if your project develops new products or sales that don't currently exist, because that means your baseline right now is 0. You don't have to measure it at the beginning of the project. If this isn't the case, be sure you have the ability to measure it. Take some time to explain how you reached your monetary figures so reviewers are confident you know what you're talking about. If you just pick a number out of thin air, you're less likely to get funded. If you can explain how you came up with this number, you're helping demonstrate a good grasp of your marketing, and that you have the skill to carry out the project. Also keep in mind return on investment. All right, it's the only outcome where you need to discuss financial gain. So you're kind of at a disadvantage when it comes to return on investment. All other types of projects have other inherent returns. But yours is black and white here. So in terms of dollar value, if you ask for $100,000 and your return is $50,000, you're not going to get a $100,000 grant. Okay, your return on investment needs to show the investment made financially. Outcome number 2 is increasing access to specialty crops and expanding specialty crop production and distribution is the research, innovation, and education area. We got 10 indicators to choose from, 6 of which have sub indicators. They kind of include stakeholders gaining technical knowledge regarding access and specialty crops or preparing, procuring specialty crops, gain knowledge regarding distribution or adopting best practices regarding distribution. Number of market access points for specialty crops developed or expanded, established partnerships, distribution systems, jobs either created or maintained, and people who went into specialty crop production area. Outcome number 3 is increasing food safety knowledge and processes. 5 indicators to choose from. Stakeholders gaining knowledge about the various food safety practices and ability to comply with Food Safety Modernization Act. Those establishing or revising a food safety plan. Stakeholders using funds to purchase or update food safety equipment. Again, I condensed them so you'll only see 3 points there. Outcome number 4 is improving pest and disease control processes. There's 6 indicators to choose from. Stakeholders gaining knowledge regarding tools to combat pests or diseases. Stakeholders are adopting best practices. Number of stakeholders detection after response. Stakeholders implementing new diagnostic systems, methods, etc. Outcome number 5 is developing new seed varieties and specialty crops. There's 5 indicators to choose from. Number of trials conducted, seeds developed or released, growers adopting cultivars or varieties, and acres planted with new cultivars. Outcome number 6, expanding specialty crop research and development. There's 4 indicators to choose from. Number of research goals accomplished, industry representatives and other stakeholders engaged with research results, number of research outputs published, and research conclusions, various sub-indicators to choose from there. And last outcome is improving environmental sustainability of the specialty crops. 6 indicators to choose from. Stakeholders gaining knowledge regarding the environmental sustainability best practices, stakeholders reporting intent to adopt best practices, number of new tools developed to improve conservation, additional acres managed with sustainable practices, and the number of additional acres established and maintained for the benefit of specialty crops. In terms of the budget, actually, real quick, any questions on the outcomes before we get into the budget action? Nothing there, I'll keep moving. Eligibility-wise, salary and fringe, equipment rental, fees should be reasonable. Supplies need to be listed out in detail. Travel, likewise, each trip needs to be accounted for in detail. Contractual fees or subcontractors. There's certainly a miscellaneous / other section. See the RP for details there. There is a budget narrative. All right, we got a couple things to go over here. Explain everything in the budget in detail. Make sure everything's listed in your budget and discussed in some way in the narrative. If a reviewer has to ask, why is this computer in the budget? It's probably going to get cut out. It's also very common to only get partial funding for your grant, so don't pad with lots of overestimates, but be good at justifying each amount. Justification as opposed to anything else. Salary-wise, in the narrative, you need to define the percent time on a project for each employee. If the individuals doing the work are not employed by the project applicant, they're not employees, and they should be in the contractual or subcontractor section. Reviewers don't mind paying for salary and fringe, but they don't like to fund projects that contain only salary. Travel-wise, only employee travel should be listed here. Consultant travel is part of the consulting fees and can be including flat rate in the contractual fees of subcontractor. Need to follow federal reimbursement rates for mileage. Additional guidelines might exist for flights. Check the RFP for necessary documentation for each trip request. There's a lot of detail. There's a bit of detail needed for this one. The contractual fees, subcontractors, consultants provide a short description of the services each contract covers and include the flat rate fee or the total hourly rate fee for each contract. Contractual hourly rates cannot exceed GS 15 step 10 for the area. That's going to be in the federaljobs.net salary-based website area. Otherwise, in the other / miscellaneous, there's a detailed description of all other direct costs such as conferences or meetings, communications, speaker training fees, publication costs, data collection. That can all be part of the other section, but you're going to want to review the RFP for more details on that. In eligibility wise, we have capital expenses, meals, equipment, fundraising and lobbying, and supplanting. What am I talking about here? Equipment cannot be over $5,000 worth, okay, unless you're renting it. All right, there's differences between supplies and equipment. Supplies, it can't be over $5,000 per unit price, but you can ask for in excess of $5,000 if the unit price is below said. If it's less than $5,000 in the individual unit price. There's no fundraising or lobbying for grant making. Travel is only transportation, mileage, car rental, and airplane. There's no hotel or meals or per diem. There's no direct expenses allowed with this grant. We talk about supplanting. If salary is funded for the people working on the grant, regardless of whether the grant is awarded, you cannot charge that salary to the grant. Essentially, salary is already funded, can't be replaced, which is supplanted by grant funds. This is usually only applicable to government. Something to keep in mind here, there's no match required. I'll probably mention that again. Project is mainly benefiting one individual business or entity. It won't be funded. Again, that's a big part of the review itself. Don't include non-specialty crops in the application or project description anywhere. Your purpose, goals, and outcomes and budget should align with the same concept. Again, no matches required. Here's the evaluation criteria that the review committee grades all of the applications on. Our rubric. Moving on, additional factors which may impact the funding. Total amount of funding each applicant, crop, and or industry is receiving. Proposal priorities submitted by applicants. Geographic location of project beneficiaries and past recipient performance on previous specialty crop block grants. What to avoid: changing the application format, adding additional information which is not requested in the application, using a different budget format than the one in the application, waiting until the last minute to plan and submit the proposal, and submitting a proposal with grammar and spelling errors, and not having someone review the grant before submitting it. All right, this grant's a real stickler for grammar or following the rules or writing style. Your application won't be thrown out if you forget something, but it'll be docked points. Although the scoring criteria is specific, it's based more on project idea and how well you can convey the importance of the project for it to accomplish its desires, and for good grammar, fancy words. But it's always good to be close to sticking to those points. Really, that is the extent of it, and I thank you all for sitting through this, and I'm happy to answer any questions that are up right now. Andrew, do we have anything?
So, do you hear me? I have a question. So this is, we were the Shiitake Growers Association, and we did receive a grant back in 2017, and we successfully completed it. But with COVID and things, our organization has kind of had a really tough time. We've lost a lot of ground, and we've lost a lot of the restaurants closed and things like that. So that was really a big hit for us.
Yeah.
In looking at this new, and you mentioned the COVID, thing, and I was just curious, in moving forward in our application, some of what we're going to be applying for will be sort of rebuilding some of what we lost during these last 2 years. Is that acceptable, or do we have to go totally new?
It's acceptable. I'm almost on the verge of saying, for starters, there's no limit to the amount of applications one can submit. Okay, so you could feasibly write one application with a completely different project proposal. You could also write another application where you're expounding on the previous specialty crop block grant. And we certainly understand the impact that COVID's had on the industry and the grants and everything. And that's been just such a shame to see. But I would, if for the latter project where you're, going after the previous funded, you're definitely going to want to mention how COVID impacted the project and why you're hoping to kind of repeat the project, how you can, how you're looking to accomplish it this time and add on to it as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, we accomplished it and we move forward, but it seems like, we've kind of gotten stuck in a bad place right now. And so some of the things that we did, we need to revisit and rebuild, and, like our board, needs to be, move forward. And there's just so much that has to happen in order for us to re-strengthen the organization as well as the industry. And so, I'm just kind of thinking, because we already applied for it once and got it and did the work, if that would go against us, because we might be, doing a few of those elements again, just to make sure that, we're recontacting, the woodland owners, we're recontacting, some of these groups and bringing them back into the fold, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's fine. You're just going to want to say why that's important. Why you need to do it again, and don't just say COVID, but expound on why you need to redo that again.
Okay. Yeah, you had mentioned something about COVID funding, and I just wasn't sure if that fit into this or not.
It does not, but we certainly understand the impact it might have had on any previous projects if you're mentioning that.
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate that.
And I do want to say that I think, Ingrid, when Ryan was mentioning the COVID, there was a special second call for applications last fall. That was a one-time COVID relief specialty crop block grant call for more proposals. So I think if you're addressing the challenges and supporting the specialty crop industry in the state, if it happens to be COVID or not COVID, I think that's irrelevant. I mean, it's almost like, how are you building it? How are you benefiting the industry or other producers, and focus on that.
Just act like we're just starting over, or we're just, but on the successes that we already did. Okay.
Yeah, I think referencing the work that you've done and the new challenges or the need, and just justifying your need for that, and talk about how you can have some measurable outcomes to overcome those challenges and improve the current situation. I think that is, in general, the format that you should follow for any proposal.
Okay, great. I appreciate that. Thank you.
So Sylvia just typed in a question about number of awards. I think you joined a little bit late. Ryan had said earlier, Sylvia, that this fluctuates and varies from year to year, but about a year ago there was around 20 applications, and about 3/4 of those were funded. So about 15 or so were funded. Not every grant project will be funded at the full amount, but yeah. So when you look at some other grant programs out there, when you have about 10 or 15% of all the submitted applications getting funded, this grant program has a lot more funding to award a higher percentage of those applications being submitted.
Yeah. Spot
on. Ryan, some people have asked about getting the presentation materials. would it be okay to send out the PowerPoint of this? I know that we could get that out to people quicker than probably the recording, but what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think that should be fine. I just need to
Format it and save
format
it
it.
as a
Yeah, just
PDF.
format. Just make sure that's okay with the powers that be, but I think it's okay.
And I will also stress that there is nothing inside this PowerPoint presentation that you can't find in the RFP. And in some ways, in some cases, this presentation was summarizing some of those concepts, and you'll find more information in the RFP. If you read something in the RFP, the request for proposals, that is, you're unclear about, reach out to me or Ryan and we can add some clarification, but I don't think you're going to find anything more insightful in this PowerPoint presentation than you would find in the typical RFP. RFP, that's just the acronym for request for proposals. Different grant programs have different acronyms for that, but it is basically the rules and regulations that you have to follow to have your proposal submitted. It tells you what kinds of projects they're going to fund. If there's priorities, it tells you how long the proposal should be. Some grant programs tell you like what font size to use, and what format of files, and just all the instructions on submitting the proposal. So if you don't follow the instructions and don't read that RFP, then your grant is probably going to be less competitive. So read those instructions very clearly and read it more than once. The RFP is in the website. I will copy and paste the link right now. I did that earlier. This link takes you to the specialty crop block grant page on DATCP, DATCP's website, the Department of Agriculture. At the top is going to be the request for proposals, a link to that PDF, and then underneath that is the application, the Word document that you would be filling out and submitting to Ryan. Ryan, I don't know if you mentioned when is the deadline and what time is the deadline?
5 p.m. Yeah, 2 weeks from today, March 24th, 5 p.m. Obviously, feel free to submit it today if you want to.
Okay.
But I understand that there's probably going to be a lot coming in that day. Just again, ask for confirmation. Make sure I got it.
All right. We'll wait for any other questions, but if none come in the next minute or so, I think we're going to wrap up early.